Welcome back to the Leading Saints podcast. Today you're going to listen to a fantastic interview with Skyler Wilcox. He's the Senior Administrator of EFY at BYU. That's right, I did not misspeak. We're talking about especially for youth, not for the strength of youth, FSY. And a lot of people don't know, which is why I wanted to invite Skyler in to talk about this, that EFY, especially for youth, still exists. It's still an active program that BYU does, but it's made some adjustments since 2019 when the church announced that there'd be more of this emphasis, more formal approach to FSY that I'm sure many youth leaders out there are definitely familiar with. And with Skyler, he has a long experience being a counselor at EFY, teaching seminary, and now being a senior administrator of the program. And, whether he wants to admit it or not, I consider him a subject expert when it comes to creating experiences that develop testimony for youth. I mean, there's many, even in this audience that are listening to this, thinking fondly about their time at EFY and just what it did for your faith, for your testimony. And it was maybe a turning point for you to that led to a path of flourishing faith and led to a mission and led to, temple covenants and marriages and all those beautiful things that come with our faith tradition. And so I wanted to, we talk about these things. How do we develop experiences? How do we teach youth? How do we engage with youth? How do we stimulate connection with youth so that they don't have to have specifically a formal EFY experience, but they can constantly have those types of experiences in their own wards, in their own communities, with their youth leaders, and on Sunday in their classes and so forth. So great conversation. Here's my interview with Skyler Wilcox, the Senior Administrator of EFY. All right, Skyler, set the record straight. EFY still exists?
EFY is still around, believe it or not.
Okay, it's so funny. Like, even when I met you for the first time, I'm like, wait a minute, like, don't you know you don't have a job anymore?
Yeah, exactly. So. I think I've learned that if I push this little freckle right here on my arm, it just spits out what the difference is between EFY and FSY. So I don't even have to think about it anymore. But
So tell us the difference.
Yeah, so when the church made the announcement in 2019 that FSY was going to take the traditional EFY sessions, there was a line in that statement down at the very bottom that mentioned that BYU would continue to run EFY programs, but they would just be specialty programs. So specifically what we've been able to take on are different types of sessions that are not generally held on campuses. So we have our adventure program where the youth are out in these, former BSA camps in the mountains. They're going whitewater rafting, they're going rappelling, they're going canyoneering, but they still get those elements of EFY, right? There's still a counselor that's over them. There's still a focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have our special edition sessions that are held at church history sites around the country. And then we have a couple of campus sessions, Habits for Life, which is based on the 7 habits of highly effective teens. And then a mission ready session where, because Provo is right there close to the MTC, we can go take them to the MTC and have them tour the MTC before they become missionaries, how to be missionaries today.
Wow.
We've also talked as a team, are there other things that we can be doing, right? There's no limit to what EFY can offer because we can be special in all of these different offerings. And it's an exciting place for us to be able to say there's nothing that's outside of our realm here. We can go and do whatever we want if we feel like it's going to benefit the youth in helping them become more like the Savior.
So were these like experiential or adventure type things involved with the former model, or was that more of what the FSY model is?
Yeah. A lot of what FSY is kind of the former EFY model. And for the last couple of years, we've kind of been playing with that model as well, right? Because obviously 50 years worth of a model shows that it works. And the way that the week is lined up, there are certain things that just help make the experience great. And there's certain things that we don't want to get rid of, right? We're never going to get rid of a testimony meeting. We're never going to get rid of the gospel aspects that are happening at an EFY session. But certain things like, why do we do a games night? And why do we do it on a certain night? Or why do we have these other activities? Those are things that EFY is now looking at saying, can we make it different? Can we make this a really personal and specialized opportunity for each one of the youth who attend a session?
Yeah. So before, the old model with EFY was, more like FSY is now. However, it wasn't like now it's the youth, it's part of the church program, right? Like, this is our year, we're sending the youth, and the price isn't, I mean, they don't pay anything, right? Or
I think $75
that's right,
or something like that. Yeah. Which is so cool. I mean, And that's the biggest thing. That's what EFY wanted to do for years and years and years, was be able to offer this program to youth anywhere around the world. EFY personally didn't have the resources to be able to do that. So the church being able to come in and take that was a huge blessing. That's what EFY has always wanted to do. And so from our standpoint with EFY, we're our FSY's #1 supporters. There's no competition whatsoever between EFY and FSY. We're accomplishing a similar task, right, in helping youth to find the Savior. We're just approaching it a little bit different way. But there's no competition, no ill will between either one of those programs, because they're doing what our goal was, right, from the get-go 50 years ago. And it's so cool that they've been able to do that.
Yeah. Now, BYU ran the original EFY experience. Are they still involved with FSY, or that's more like the general young men's, young women's?
So there are individuals who work at BYU who their job is to help sustain and support the FSY program. Obviously, all the main decisions, everything that's major will happen at church headquarters. But there's a fairly large group that's in BYU Continuing Education that is supporting FSY.
Okay. Cool. And then EFY is obviously, it's a BYU run program and everything, right?
Yep. So there are 4 full-time individuals who are helping run EFY. It is a BYU program. So that's a big part of why, you look at FSY, $75, as we mentioned. EFY is not going to be $75, right? There's not that help that the church is able to provide, because we do have to cover our own costs. But we also believe that because we are a little bit different, because we are separate, we can do things a little bit differently and kind of make it the experience that we feel like is going to be best for the youth.
And imagine, there's a lot of costs if you're traveling on bus through church history sites, or flying somewhere, or, all these
water rafting. Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So what are you hearing? Like, what's the typical youth? I'm just thinking of that bishop who's familiar with his youth and thinking, man, we're sending them to FSY, of course, but Johnny, Jim, and Sally, they could maybe use something a little bit more involved or experiential. What are the typical youth that show up at these things?
Yeah, great question. A lot of our youth are the ones who want to be out in the outdoors, or they want to be doing something. A lot of them are the ones who, being in a classroom is not their forte, right? It's not going to be something that really speaks to them. But being out under the stars in Moab, having just accomplished this incredibly hard task of mountain biking when they've never done it before, and then they're sitting there with a YSA counselor who's telling them about how hard things can help them draw closer to the Savior. Yeah. And it clicks and it connects with them in a way that wouldn't necessarily sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher, right? That's, I think, a big part of what our youth dynamic is with EFY. It's people who want to experience different types of things, whether that's the adventure, whether that's the church history, walking where the prophet Joseph walked, walking where the Savior walked. It's that kind of a group that just feels a little bit different than the normal group. Not that there's anything wrong about either one of them, but it's just a different dynamic, a different approach to how they can understand and live the gospel of Jesus Christ better.
Yeah, that's great. So does the price vary then depending on, because you have different types of experiences, the price varies depending on what experience people choose?
Yeah, it does. So obviously our campus sessions, right, our Habits for Life, our Mission Ready, we're at BYU campus. All of the support for those sessions are actually held right in our building, right? So there's some of those costs that we don't have to worry about compared to going down to Moab. We've got a whitewater rafting company that we work with. We've got BSA staff that help with the rappelling and the canyoneering. In our church history sites, we're getting tour buses. We're going to see these different things. So there is a varying cost between the different session types.
Yeah. And imagine this is something, especially now with, Boy Scouts of America and something we're involved with. And I think, COVID kind of messed the trajectory up with, I think, what the young men's, young women's presidencies were trying to put together. But, I think a lot of youth, they don't have as many opportunities for these experiential type of activities as much as maybe we did when we were younger in scouting and things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up, that's what we did, right? Is we went to scouts. So we went to scout camp and we got our merit badges and we got our Eagle Scouts. And I have an 8-year-old now that there's no talk of that whatsoever. And so this is kind of an opportunity for those people who really long for that, who want that experience, being in the outdoors, having those adventure type experiences, but also still connecting the gospel of Jesus Christ. Here's an option, and it's a great option.
Yeah, really good. So I think we'll come back to this, touch on this, but the 2025, you're celebrating 50 years of EFY.
Yep.
So take us back to the history. Like, where did this program come from?
Yeah.
And what do you know about the history?
Well, it's funny too, because initially, 1976 was the first year of EFY. And so if you look at 1976 and 2025, anybody looks at it and goes, that's not 50, but you have to count 1976 as the first year.
Gotcha.
So math, right? For those people who are not like me, not very good at math. So in 1976, it started as this idea by Ron Hills of having almost an Education Week experience for youth.
So how long has Education Week been around?
That's a good question.
That's another guy,
I have to go
right?
look into that. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. But, it was just this idea of, can we provide something for youth like we're doing in these Education Week experiences where people are just having these amazing spiritual experiences. They're growing in the gospel. They're learning so much. And the first year, the registration was not great and it was pretty low. And it was getting to the point where they were about a week out and they were like, we need to get more registration or we can't run this program. And miraculously, back then you had to mail in your registration, and there was a mail-in of a stake from California that sent just the right number of youth to be able to attend the first session. And so the first session of EFY almost never even happened.
Wow.
Says a lot about the hand of God in this program and how important it was for him to make sure that it was going. And then from there, just continually grew, right? And it started on BYU campus, started with one session, then it moved to multiple weeks, and then it started being to different campuses, different places around the country, and has just grown exponentially to the point where in 2019, obviously the church saw what a great program it was, what a great program it is, how much it was helping the youth, and figured that it was time to step in and try and figure out if there's a way they could make it available to even more individuals. I know as a missionary, being in the MTC, a lot of times you'd hear from missionaries, when was the first time you knew you had a testimony? Well, it was at EFY, right? Or just in my experience, before I worked for EFY, I was a seminary teacher. And so I'd ask my youth, my kids that were in my classroom, how did you know, or when did you know that you were feeling the Spirit for the first time? Oh, it was at this EFY session, right? And so there's just such a power in the program. We have seen just in the 5 to 6 years since it has, transitioned, right, and become something a little bit different, the Lord's hand is still very, very much in this work. He's very excited about what's happening at these sessions because of what it is, right? It's drawing his children closer to him and to the Savior.
Yeah.
It's not very often that I think programs get to celebrate 50 years. And it's even more rare that a program gets to 50 years and then says, all right, but what are we doing? And should we be doing things differently? And should we be changing the approach of what this program looks like? But that's the boat that we're in. And it's a little nerve-wracking, right? To take a program that's been going for 50 years and say, let's turn it on its head and let's see what sticks. But it's also really exciting. The youth of today are different than the youth before.
Yeah.
They need something that's different than they've ever needed before in the world that we live in. And we feel like we have that opportunity to really tailor this experience for them to give them exactly what they need.
Yeah, that's awesome. So early on, was it like the Education Week setup where we're just going to offer a bunch of different classes, like more gospel focused classes that on BYU campus, these young youth can go to? Was that the idea? Yeah,
there was always an element of fun that they knew they needed to include, right? And so there was these outside things that weren't just straight classes. Education Week, is obviously all day, all classes, right? They knew that wasn't going to be something that was going to be super beneficial for the youth. So there always was this element of, can we do something a little bit different? Can we throw in a games night, right? Can we throw in FHE activities? Those programs have slowly evolved, right? We've had other programs or other activities that have come in. We've tried them for a couple of years. They don't quite work. So we'll replace them with something else. But it was this idea of just how do we help youth to learn about the gospel, right? And make it so that it's something that is sticking with them for longer than just the time that we have them with us.
Yeah. And because there's always that component. I never went to EFY. It was funny being a Utah boy growing up. I always thought it was like this thing that BYU does for members of the church who don't live in Utah. Because, I heard of like cousins or things coming from out of Utah and I'm like, I didn't know I was actually invited, but anyways.
Well, and it's funny, my story, I also grew up in Utah, knew about EFY. At the time they had a stay-at-home option, so you could go to a campus, you could experience everything from about 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock, but then you'd go home and you'd spend night at home. And so I did that for 2 years. I actually hated my experience at EFY, which is hilarious looking at where I am now. But I was very introverted. I was very much like I'm just here for the gospel, for the spiritual stuff. I don't want to go make friends. I don't want to go to the dance. I don't, and all this stuff. And that was a huge part of EFY, right? Was being able to come out of your shell and really be who you want to be in that situation. So after 2 years as a youth, I was like, I'm good. I don't need it anymore,
Yeah.
and then went on a mission, came home, and had somebody who was just like, you would be a phenomenal EFY counselor. And I think I'm pretty sure I laughed in their face at the point, because I was like, there's no way. But just kept having that inkling, right? Or that spiritual prompting. You should just try this. You should see if it'll work out for you. And so I applied, was hired as a counselor, and it has completely changed my life.
Yeah.
I worked for 4 years in the field. I met my wife as a counselor.
Oh, wow.
And like everything that I have been able to accomplish, I feel like I can turn back to that turning point of getting involved with EFY. And if that's just one person's story, right, for 50 years, how many stories are there like that? And the fact that we can continue to have experiences like that is just so amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to think about the legacy of what it did for those young teenagers that are now adults and, but the legacy of the counselors. I mean, as I've met different people, sometimes they'll come up, I was a, EFY counselor, and it was like a really pivotal moment in their young adult development, right? Of having that opportunity.
Yeah, it's a huge focus right now, I feel like, of the church, the YSA group in particular. There's a lot of focus on the youth and giving them those experiences leading up to a mission. There's a lot of focus on missionaries and making sure that they're having those spiritual experiences. But something that I even noticed when I came home from my mission is it's just, okay, good luck with your next step, right? Maybe it's college, maybe it's marriage. We hope it's marriage, but like there's not a lot there. And EFY can be that thing or that place as well for our staff where they can have those spiritual experiences for themselves that help keep them tied to the gospel for the rest of their lives.
So I assume the EFY counselor opportunity is still available?
It is, yeah.
How does that work?
One thing that we've changed is we've actually allowed married couples to work as counselors for EFY. That was a change of a couple of years ago.
I assume they just can't have kids yet?
Well, they can. They just can't bring them to the session, right? So they've got to find some place for them. So a lot of them don't. Obviously, they're young couples. A lot of our married couples are those who either have worked previously and then want to come back in the position because it's just made such an impact on their lives. But our very first week of the summer, when we first started it, we had a session director who had some daughters that were at the session. The session director had been going through a pretty nasty divorce. And her daughters ended up being in the group that had the married counselors. And, session director comes up at the end of the week and just got tears in her eyes and says, you have no idea how badly my girls needed to see a marriage that was working, a marriage that was centered in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's been something that we've seen across the board with married counselors. So we have that aspect. We do still have the YSA counselors. And then we have leadership teams. So we have health coordinators, we have lead counselors, and we have coordinators, which give them real life experience. I mean, we have an alumni base of individuals who have worked for EFY that have gone on to be CEOs and owners of businesses and all these great things. And they'll point back to their EFY experience. Not only did it teach them how to be a good disciple of Jesus Christ, but it taught them how to manage people, how to be a people person, how to have conversations that are difficult or hard, things that they're using now in their everyday professional life.
Yeah. Now with the counselors, the idea is that they're over a certain pod of attendees. Is that the idea? They kind of,
so they'll generally have anywhere from about 10 to 12 youth that they're in charge of, right? And that's their group. And then they're assigned a co-counselor who's generally a member of the opposite sex. And those two together will make up a company so that you have boys and girls together in a company setting. There's certain activities where they're just going to be with the group, right? Every night they'll have a reflect and review where they're just with their group and they're talking about the things that they learned that day, the impressions, the spiritual things that they felt. And then there's other parts where they're together as a company, right? When they're together at games night, they're doing things together. When they're going to classes or when they're going to the church history sites, when they're doing the mountain biking or the whitewater rafting, they're doing those as companies so they can get that kind of a camaraderie as well with each other. So
back in 2019, before the shakeup there with the FSY, how would you just describe the experience and how it had evolved up to that point?
2019 was a big year. The counselor, the staff position was very competitive. There were thousands of applications every year. Everybody wanted to be in that position. Registration was selling out almost immediately. They had wait lists. You tried to get on early so that you could get an early to register date that was before the actual even registration opened. it was blowing up, right? I want to say there was about 40 to 50,000 youth that were attending every single year. It was across the country. There were multiple sessions at multiple campuses, multiple weeks. It was just a phenomenal thing to be a part of. And now to see where it's transitioned, our sessions with EFY, they're smaller, right? We don't have the numbers necessarily that we've had previously, but we also lean into that a little bit, where when you come to an EFY session, you're not just another number in this huge mass of people that are doing this thing. Your counselor will 100% know you. Your counselor's counselor will probably know you. And the session director might even by the end of the week know your name, just because there's only about 200 people that are doing this. And so it's a really tight group that is able to foster connection and this idea that you're more than just a big group. You're an individual that's important and that's known.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like, it was at a time where probably from the EFY BYU standpoint, you're thinking, man, this is growing so fast and the demand is going. So to have that release valve of FSY was huge.
Yeah, I know they were looking, every summer it was, are there other campuses that we can be looking at? Are there other locations? Are there places in the United States that we're not hitting, right? That are there things that we knew when I worked as a coordinator, we were in Buena Vista, Virginia, and then on the weekend drove down to Tennessee to go do an express session in Tennessee, because at the time there wasn't any full sessions in Tennessee, but they wanted to give those youth the opportunity. So in that 2019 announcement, to be able to know, okay, this is now going all the way across and we have that additional support, I'm sure was just a fantastic thing.
So in 2019, it was like, obviously it wasn't just a BYU campus thing. It was all over the world, would you say?
So it was, the EFY program was just in the United States and a little bit in Canada, but the program itself, EFY, was around the world. And the church was kind of helping support and do that outside of the United States and Canada. That 2019 announcement was when the United States and Canada was now going to be under the church's direction as well with the program.
And so that you would have you'd grab go to Florida State University and rent out their campus for this type of thing? Or?
Yeah, so a lot of the admins would be in charge of different regions of the United States. And so they would be in charge of working with those college campuses to, hey, we want to have a youth group on your campus. We need event space, we need housing, we need catering, etc. And a lot of the campuses were all for it, because they would have youth that were coming to their sessions, having spiritual experiences, and would almost connect those spiritual experiences to the locations where they were, right? So institutes were super excited to get involved, because they wanted to have 14, 15, 16-year-olds in their institute buildings so that they would come back when they were in college, right? And so a lot of campuses were really excited about hosting. With some of the sites, for example, special editions in Nauvoo, there's not a campus in Nauvoo or anywhere. Yeah. So you'd have hotels and different things, but there was a lot of those relationships that were built up through all those years that made the transition to FSY that much easier.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything else about the history or high points, low points, or things you're focused? Because you're in the midst of, you're having different gatherings and things to celebrate this with former, individuals who are involved, right?
Yeah. So we're having a big celebration here shortly with the celebrating 50 years of EFY. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but just the fact that this was an idea that was created in 1976, that first session almost didn't run. It's just so cool to see how different the program is now, right? Both FSY and EFY. Ron Hills had a vision.
And who was he?
So he was the one who ended up starting the program.
Was he BYU professor? Or
I believe he just worked at BYU and had this idea to start this program. But he just had this vision for youth, and unfortunately has passed away. But I imagine he's just looking at this now and thinking, my word, probably had no idea that this is where it was supposed to go or how it was going to work. But it's so cool to see how just those little inspirations, those little thoughts can lead to something so much greater when the Lord is involved, right? When the Savior's involved in the work. And that's one of the big things with our EFY team now. Again, we're a small team. There's only 4 full-time admins who are trying to run these sessions every year in various locations. They all look different. But one of the things that our team is really centered on is, would this be something that can center the youth on Jesus Christ? If Christ were in this meeting with us at this point, and we were talking about this, would this be something that he would approve of? And so that's filtered now from 1976 to 2025 in every single aspect of what EFY does.
That's cool. That's really cool. So, how many years now since you did those 4 years as a as a counselor,
Mhm.
and then
Yep.
did you continue? You just get a job?
So
or?
I worked for 4 years as a counselor, and then actually left and taught seminary full time
Oh, cool.
for 3 years. And then after that, always had my eye on EFY. As a seminary teacher, I figured I would try and come back and be a session director or a speaker at these EFY sessions. But I always was like, man, if I could say that I get to do EFY for my full-time job, that's the dream, right?
Yeah.
That would be the ideal. And so right before the announcement actually happened between, with the church coming out saying they were going to take these traditional EFY sessions, there was a position that opened in the department that's right next to EFY that formerly was called conferences and workshops. And I had a friend who was in the EFY office who let me know that this is a position that was opened. And she's like, you need to apply for this position, because if you get it and there's any sort of movement within EFY, you would be in continuing education and you could apply for that position as well. So I applied for the position, interviewed, ended up getting hired, and worked adult conferences for a little bit. It was about 4 months. It was right before COVID. And then the church obviously made this announcement. And I initially thought, well, this is a great opportunity to go get involved with FSY, this new program that the church is going to take. And so we were kind of trying to decide what was going to happen, my director at the time, and working with continuing education. And in February of 2020 is when they made the decision where, we still got this EFY program. We need someone to help run this EFY program. And so I was asked to become an administrator with EFY under the direction of an individual who had been working with the traditional EFY at the time, and he became our new director. We had February at the time, 2020. We were told you have 4 months to get everything figured out for the summer, which is an insane ask of 3 new people running this EFY program. And then obviously a month later is when COVID happened and everything shut down. We didn't run anything in 2020. 2021 was then the first real official start of the new EFY. And so I have been with continuing education since 2019, with EFY specifically since 2020. Nice.
So with that experience, even in the seminary as well, let's consider you an expert in this field a little bit, as far as with youth and creating experiences, teaching youth, because there's so many youth leaders out there who they just don't know what to do, right? They want to have impactful, even weekday activities.
Absolutely.
They want pre-quorum to be engaging. They want to engage these youth, and sometimes what the trend I see is we don't know what to do other than let's just have a ton of fun. Yeah. Which, hey, I'm on board, right?
Sure.
But sometimes it almost gets to a place of okay, we're just having fun, but and mentioning this and this principle and that, Jesus Christ there or whatever, and ending with the testimony meeting or whatever. But what advice would you give to youth leaders, just understanding youth and creating a testimony machine? Because that's really what EFY became, was that it was a pivotal moment of that testimony development.
Oh, it's such a good question. The first thing that pops in my mind is something that I was taught as a seminary teacher, is that we do not need to shy away from the gospel of Jesus Christ. The youth are ready to hear the gospel, and not to hide or to shy away or we're going to tiptoe through this subject. They can take it, and they need it, right? Especially in the world that we live in today, with the countless number of resources, whether they're good or bad, they're going to hear things about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I feel like it's our responsibility as leaders and of those over the youth to teach them the gospel as it is, and to not shy away from that. And so that would be my number one thing, is we don't need to shy away. We can have the fun, but still include the gospel in it, and not try and, how do we sugarcoat this, or how do we sneak it in there? No, let's just give it to them as it is, right? And then number 2, I think the biggest thing that youth need today is just connection. We noticed specifically with the EFY program, that first year coming out of COVID was a very interesting year, because connection was lost. A lot of people did not have that, right? They were in front of computer screens and Zoom and things like that, but most of the time they were just at home. And so connection was something that they were yearning for, that they were striving for. And it was a very unique experience that first year to have a group of people who are we haven't done this in a while. How do we, what are our social cues? And what, it was a little awkward, if we're being completely honest. And that's okay. One of the big things that I love about EFY and our staff in particular is they're awkward. They're weird. Like they totally are. But they show that it's so okay and it's so good to have fun, to be weird, and still live the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? And they provide that connection. When our staff are more vulnerable with our youth, that's when the youth connect with them. And that's when all of a sudden it becomes this switch of, oh, we're not just out here mountain biking, or we're not just out here playing this game for family home evening. We're building connection with each other. And then ultimately we're building connection with the Savior, because those leaders, those counselors, those young men, young women's leaders, they should be pointing everything back to the Savior through their words, through their deeds, their examples. Everything points to the Savior. And so if you're building the connection with the youth, you're also building the connection with the youth and the Savior.
Yeah.
And I think so those two things I feel like are the things that youth need right now, right? They need the gospel of Jesus Christ. They need it straightforward, and they need connection with each other, connection with the adults that they trust, and ultimately connection with the Savior.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's my job to ask impossible questions, but I'm just curious if there's maybe more here. Is like when you talk about connection and a leader or a counselor being vulnerable, right? Like,
yeah,
we hear that. Sometimes it's like, I don't know how to do that, right? And I almost worry I see some youth leaders and just leaders in general, they'll almost try and be too excited.
Yeah.
Too almost too rah-rah, too like almost a little goofy to kind of be fun. And it's like, I don't feel like that's a real person, but I know you're excited to be here, but you're kind of in my face, you know? Like, so, I mean, what does that vulnerability look like?
Yeah.
What is that connection? What really stimulates that in the moment?
As you said that, another word that popped in my mind is just being genuine. And I think vulnerability and being genuine are very closely connected to each other. Because you're absolutely right. There are some people who will get up all in your face and will be super rah-rah. And 14-year-old Skyler would have turned away from that person immediately, right? That was not my cup of tea. That was not the thing that I was going to do. But at the same time, someone who's being vulnerable can be really genuine in their approach. You don't have to pretend to be something that you're not. If you're not the rah-rah, totally fine. You can be who you are, because there's probably that youth that needs your experience. As a young seminary teacher, I was in a seminary with two very well-known teachers in the school. And one was very rah, up in their face, right? And just so excited. And he just knew how to control a crowd and get their attention, and then to, give them the gospel of Jesus Christ. The other was almost the opposite of that, where it was almost a little bit standoffish, but it worked. Where he would just be like, no, you guys are stupid. That's not. And it was like, you can't say that but it was him. And it was so good. And the youth knew that he was being super vulnerable, so that when he'd have those really deep, genuine conversations, they knew he wasn't kidding around with them. And so as this young seminary teacher, I'm like, I have these two completely different experiences in front of me. How in the world am I supposed to help the youth? And I ultimately just had to have really deep conversations with my Father in heaven of, what are the experiences that I've had throughout my life that have helped prepare me to where I am today? I'm in this classroom. I've been chosen to teach. These are my youth. I believe that they're in my room for a specific reason, in this class for a specific reason. So help me know, what are the experiences that I've experienced so far that are going to be beneficial for them? And as I did that, I noticed there was one class in particular. I was prompted to tell this story about me in high school that was very vulnerable, that I had only shared with like my parents, and that was it, right? And it was just this very hard thing for me to be like, cool, this is the first day of school. I don't know any of you, and I'm going to tell you this really crazy story that you're going to feel like, wow, this guy had it rough.
Yeah.
And I didn't say that necessarily to be all about me, right? But it was something that the Spirit prompted me to say in that class in particular. In the next class, it wasn't prompted. And so just the idea that the Spirit knows what we need to say and when we need to say it, and can help us figure out how to showcase that we are being genuine, that we're not being fake in our rah-rah, but that we can just build the connection that way. The youth are really good at detecting whether someone is being fake or whether they're being real. Yeah. So rather than worrying about, my real looks different than this person's real, be who you are, and the youth are going to resonate with that. Maybe not all of them, but eventually the Spirit will touch them in a way that will touch all of them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just recognizing that you may need to take some reflective moments of just saying, who am I really like?
Mm-hmm.
And am I trying to hide behind an identity rather than be more genuine in these roles? You know?
It's interesting in our role with EFY as we're hiring counselors. There is sometimes this idea that in order to be a really good counselor with EFY, you have to be standing on your chair and doing the dances, and you have to be out there and whatever. And that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
Some of the best counselors that I know that have worked for the EFY program are the ones who find the one-on-one moments. They're a little bit more quiet, right? But they build that relationship because they know who they are and they stick to that. And then the youth really, really resonate with them. And it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. What about the teaching dynamic? Just there's so many names that we take for granted these days, of like Brad Wilcox and John By the Way, right? That they all, I don't know if they were discovered per se through the EFY machine, but they definitely spent some time there, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's others you could rattle off too,
Sure.
but and they're just so dynamic, so good, like they're engaging, and this, I think, was a big component of the EFY model, was that these teachers really knew how to connect these principles to youth in such a masterful way, right? And then here we are tasked like, well, you're teaching the priests or the 16-year-old girls on Sunday. We're like, I don't know how to do that. And we sometimes maybe think you have to do that. But what can you teach us about teaching the youth, or like what can we consider going into that experience?
Yeah, I think, you bring up a really good point. We have these, I would call master teachers, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we were to ask them, what have you done? How did you learn this? What'd you do? They would point it all back to the Savior, right? They would point back to, we're just trying to teach like the Savior taught. And they are so different in how they approach their teaching. I've had the opportunity to obviously work closely with some of them and with the session directors that we currently hire. And there are some who will approach a topic completely different than another, but kind of going back to the point that we just made, they realize that they need to be genuine in their approach of how they're going to teach it. So they're going to spend the time for them personally going over the material, right? Whatever material that is, whether it's the scriptures, whether it's the Come Follow Me or other resources that they're given. If they know that this is the task that's in front of them to teach, they're going to spend the time personally to make sure that they understand it. And I've noticed that the best teachers are the ones who then can share with the youth the experience that they went through when they were studying it for themselves, right? It's those aha moments that we have in our personal studies where we go, whoa, has that always been in the Book of Mormon? Like, I don't remember reading that verse before. And if we have that moment as a personal study and then can convey that to the youth, and making sure that we convey, this happened because I was doing my own personal study, it inspires the youth to want to have that kind of experience for themselves. Being in the classroom, having that experience to teach, that's awesome, right? There should be great experiences that are happening in the classroom, but I also believe that it should be pointing them to the opportunities on their own to get in the habit of a personal study, to get in the habit of, what does the Spirit sound like to me? And how can I know when I'm receiving personal revelation? As a seminary teacher, that was my goal, right? I had these kids every other day for 90 minutes in a class or so. And my goal would be, hey, we're going to talk about the scriptures. We're going to talk about the stories and the principles, the doctrine that's in the scriptures. But I hope from our discussion, not only do you have those experiences, but you have the desire to then go after class, when you're at home, when you're getting ready for bed, and to have done a similar experience for yourself, whether it's with that topic or another topic that you're struggling with today.
Yeah, really good, really good. Anything else? Any other dynamic that EFY is sort of really tuned in and mastered that would be worth mentioning? Or
I mean, we've talked a little bit about this. Youth want to have fun.
Yeah.
Right? They totally do. And they're just a fun group. Like they're not adults and their brains aren't fully developed. And it's fun. Like you have to be able to kind of laugh with them at certain things, because there's just certain things that in their brain, they're like, this makes 100% sense. And you're like, not even close.
Yeah.
Like you're so far off, but it's so fun to see them go through that process. And so I feel like a really dynamic teacher is someone who can see where the youth are and be okay with that, right? Not all of them are going to be your superstars. Not all of them are going to want to be at a young men's activity or in Sunday school. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, they're there. And that's half the battle. And if you can't teach them, I think it was Elder Holland that said, if you can't teach them today, love them. And then by loving them, maybe you'll be able to teach them another day. And that's always just been one thing that's really stuck out to me, is we don't have to give them every single doctrine they're ever going to need in this little time frame. We can give them the love that the Savior would give if he was right there with them. And that will stick with them far greater than anything that we can possibly say.
Yeah. And I think another, you talk about connection, just this model of having these advisors, is that what you call them?
Session directors. Yeah.
Where, that are over 12 people or whatever, 10 to 12.
Oh, the counselors.
The counselors. Where they have a human like touch point that's saying, I'm sort of embodying the EFY experience and wanting to know, like, I see you, I talk with you, rather than let's just get a mass of teenagers in the room and have some fun, and we'll show the speaker will come, sort of like when you go to a conference. It's not like I have my team, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really effective. And obviously the ward naturally fosters that, where you have youth leaders.
It's one of the beauties, I feel like, of EFY as it is today, is this idea that you are known, right? And your counselor 100% will not only know your name, but will spend the time to get to know you. Because our numbers are a little bit smaller, our hiring can be very selective, and it is, right? We have hundreds of applications still, and we put them through quite the hiring process, because we want to make sure that we are hiring the absolute best of the best. And over the last couple of years, we have seen that, where the feedback and from the surveys that we're sending out after the sessions is, this counselor changed my life. This counselor just knew what I needed in the moment. I'll push back a little bit on that and say it wasn't necessarily the counselor, right? And the counselors would say the same thing. No, it wasn't me. It was just the Savior. And I'm just the instrument to help in that process. And I just love, as a counselor, when I was doing it, I felt like I was at my absolute best when I was at EFY. Because not only was I, in this situation where a lot of people are looking at you as an example of the Savior, but I had to be genuine. I had to get out of my comfort shell a little bit. I had to push the boundaries a little bit of, are you willing to talk about Jesus all day, every day, and to do it in Virginia, where people are around you on campus? They are not believers in Jesus, and they're going to hear you talking about Jesus. Are you willing to do that, right? And every single year that I came back, I realized that I was at my best when I was at EFY. And now, with this being, my full-time position, my career, I still look at that today and I think how incredible that is, that I get that opportunity to do that and to call it my career. All of us have that opportunity, though, as you've mentioned, in our wards, in our interactions with those that are around us, our neighbors, our friends. Those people are there, right? The youth are all around. And you don't necessarily need a calling, per se, to impact and influence others around you and point them closer to the Savior.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any other, if you were a bishop or a young women's president came to you and just said, teach me something else as far as with leading youth or teaching youth, anything else we missed or
I don't know. I don't feel like I'm necessarily an expert. You use that word and I was I don't know about that, but
I know.
I go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with just the love. It's a quirky bunch. It's a different group, and the world that they're living in today looks so much different than just even 5-10 years ago. There is nothing more important for this group, I believe, than building a connection with the Savior Jesus Christ. This is a group that needs him. We all need him, right? Obviously, but in the world that they're facing today, with it looking so different than it ever has, and with what we know as the Savior preparing his return to come back, we all need to know who he is. And I feel like we can learn a lot from being around the youth, because they want to know who he is.
Yeah.
They want to be prepared for when he comes again, even if sometimes they don't look like or seem like they're interested, right? They totally do. Like, this is a chosen generation. This is a group that was reserved for a specific time in in eternity. And what a blessing it is for us to be able to be around them and to love them and learn just as much from them as they will from our examples of being like the Savior.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to highlight, just with this new model of EFY, like focus more on the experiences type of thing. Is that a fair way to frame it?
Absolutely.
And I began over the last several years, I've become a big proponent of experiences, as far as like, because, I've done 1,000+ interviews on leading saints. I recommend books and all these things. And yeah, you can listen to this podcast, you can read the book, but there's something even deeper when we actually go experience something. Like you can draw upon deeper lessons, that not because there's a PhD in the room, right? But just the way that God shows up for both youth and adults, right? And I sometimes worry, sometimes our faith tradition is sort of skewed towards just put the teacher, put the speaker at the front of the room and have him pontificate, and we'll listen, the general conference model, which I love general conference, and obviously it should continue, but there's something else about creating an experience and doing something that's maybe new, that's a little uncomfortable, that's maybe a little risky. Yeah. And especially for youth, this can be an impactful thing. So anything you would say about that dynamic as far as the experience of learning or developing a testimony?
Yeah, it's so good. Such a great point that you bring up is, just this idea that, yes, there's great ways to learn the gospel of Jesus Christ, and each one of us are different in how we approach that. But there is something to be said about experiencing the gospel of Jesus Christ rather than living it, or excuse me, not living it, but just reading it, right? Or being taught it. Growing up in Utah, I was very familiar with going to church and being taught the gospel and going to young men's and all these things. And it wasn't, after I graduated from high school, I went to BYU. So it was just like the same thing, right? You're surrounded by a bunch of people that are going to church and that are doing things you're supposed to be doing. It wasn't until I got in the mission field and realized, whoa, this is different. Like, you have to live it now because you're surrounded by people who are not living it. And now it matters. Now it's something super important. We obviously know that that's not true, right? It always matters. But it was that experience for me that made the difference. If we can give youth that type of an experience before they get in the mission field, I believe they're going to be way better prepared as missionaries to then go out and to teach the gospel, right? Because now they have this bank of, oh yeah, when I went to EFY and I was told I was going to go whitewater rafting and I was scared out of my wits to do that, I persevered, I did it, and I learned a lot about not only myself, but overcoming difficult things. And so now as I'm going into this brand new country that I've never been before and I don't speak a word of their language that they speak, I can do hard things. And I've got the Savior right there beside me to help. The EFY program is specifically designed for those experiences that allow youth and our staff, right, and our young adults, and as we look to potentially expand outside of that, it gives those individuals the opportunity to kind of figure out what that looks like for themselves, which is a pretty neat thing. Every experience, I feel like, is going to be something that's going to be beneficial for us in one way or another. But anything or any experience that is also connected so deeply to the Savior can have a lasting impact. And I feel like that's what we're able to help facilitate with EFY.
And it really is, in my opinion, like the model, like the divine model, because God the Father didn't say, okay, I'm going to have you all go to these different classes and learn to become like me. He's like, no, I'm going to send you on an experience. Yeah. And it's going to be scary because you won't remember this. And, like there's a lot of going on here. And so if we can duplicate that in our own mortal, way of saying, we're going to go have an experience, and then that reflection part where, what did you learn from that or this is really impactful.
Well, obviously, missions and EFY, these are like big things, right? That take up a lot of time. But going as simple as, can we create an experience for young men's? Can we create an experience in our Sunday school class? Like, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but I think you can find ways to invite experience into those everyday moments that still can have that lasting impact. Yeah.
Yeah. And really, I could geek out about this all the time, but even like you look at the model of the temple, and over the years it's become less and less experiential, but they're saying we're not just sitting there. We're like putting clothes, different, robes on and clothes on. We're watching a film like as if we're stepping into an experience elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just somebody going verse by verse about this or that, right? And it really is a divine model. So I'm so pleased that EFY continues and it's happening and celebrating 50 years. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody out there listening wants to learn more and look at all the different programs, things, where do you send them?
Absolutely. So our website is efy.byu.edu. Anybody that's looking for employment can find the employment tab that's there as well, or they can go to our employment site, which is just efyemployment.byu.edu. All of our jobs are open currently.
Cool.
For our session directors and our presenters, which you don't have to be with seminaries and institute. It can be anybody that applies for those positions. And then all of our coordinator, our lead counselor, and our counselors, and as we've mentioned, the married counselors as well as an option. All of those jobs are available now, and so anybody can come. And then registration for the program itself for the youth that are attending will open in December.
Love it. Last question I have for you, Skyler, is you consider your time leading EFY, being a leader in that dynamic. How has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
That's a great question. I feel like maybe the greatest attribute that has been taught or that I have learned, and I'm still learning by being a leader, is just humility. I do not have all the answers. I'm not even close. And I have recognized that if I want to be the best leader, that for me, the best leader is being able to listen to everything that's going on, and then as a team, determine what's the right path forward. And I mentioned, we have 4 full-time admins with EFY. It's not a lot of people, but there can be some really strong opinions sometimes that are not always the exact same. There's some conflicting ideas potentially. But involved in those decisions, involved in our team, is the Savior Jesus Christ. And so I feel like more than anything, being a leader has taught me the Christ-like attribute of humility and recognizing that this is so much greater than me. And this is so much bigger than even a program or an experience. This is all centered on Jesus Christ. And if I'm doing everything that I possibly can to lead like he would, then I am developing his characteristics. I am becoming more like him, and I am being a better follower of him.